I think am I audible? Okay, great. I think we're right on the time. So I think we should start our session today. So you all know that this is the social ecological systems track. And yesterday we have explored on this what and how part. Uh, um, can I just see the hands who were there yesterday and like okay, I see that half of the people in this room were not there yesterday, so it's very great that we can pull off some of the people. So I'll just go very briefly about what we have discussed yesterday, though we have summarized things in the plenary yesterday and like today in the morning. Nadia, the colleagues from our track, also mentioned about what we are going to explore. But like yesterday, we have mainly talked about the framing. So it's on the attribution, and then from there we have talked from the community perspectives and framing, and from there we have shifted to this relationship between people and nature, which we are framing as nature-based solutions. And from there we have went to this how, where we have focused on these climate change adaptation projects from adaptive capacity, livelihood, and equity perspectives. And also we saw this vulnerability lens to address the climate change impacts through nature-based solutions and outcomes. And we have also focused on these arts, visuals through creative-based participatory engagement. So we have fantastic range of presentations, and from there we have done a really great group exercises, which can lead to the discussion of the final group exercises that we will do today after our speaker. So I'll invite my colleague Nadia to speak on that, but not now because that will open up some of the other issues that might be helpful for you to engage in the discussion. So without further ado, today in the house session, we will focus on the diverse knowledge, needs, and priorities that are required for social ecological resilience through different actors. Sumiti, why don't you take the floor? Yeah, yeah. No problem. Yeah. So we have four speakers today with us. I'll just very quickly go through them, and then I'll talk I'll invite one by one. So we have Gigi, who works for this CDCAN, Climate and Development Knowledge Network, and she has a really great example of like engaging with the communities through role plays, games, and youths as well. So yesterday we had a lot of discussion of how to engage youth. So I think she can bring in more diverse perspectives there. Then we have Emil, who is the thematic finance lead in CDKN, who will talk from the need of finance in addressing this EBA, NBS, and we'll talk about partnership, collaborative approaches, how to draw different issues. And then we have from there, we are talking from local to global. So we are going for this big data AI. We have Dr. Ashutosh from NASA, who will talk about how to use these satellite images and remote sensing in addressing these development challenges and needs. And finally, we have Sumiti, who has a decade of experience she's from Plan Adapt. She will talk from the engagement of stakeholders, like across stakeholders, various stakeholders in addressing the EBA, NBS, and development issues and challenges, and all for enhancing the social ecological resilience. So that is the very key of thinking people slash versus nature, or like people with nature, or like living in harmony with nature. So yeah, so without further ado, I'll give the floor to Gigi. I'll just encourage all of the speakers to be like 5 minutes, very, very brief. If need be, we can go for 6 minutes, but probably not more than that, because yes, we have our police Nadia with us. And yes, because after that, we would like to do a very diverse sets of group exercise that is ready. We have divided the room into 2 groups. So we will count on these evidence producers, users, gaps and challenges, and from there we would like to find out some action points on the opportunities and challenges. So yeah, Gigi, over to you.
Thank you. Can I remain seated? Okay. Thank you so much, and thank you for having me. So for me, I'm wondering if my colleagues could you please share some of the cards in the game, only the character cards, please. So what we're passing around is the CDKN climate and society game. And our game explores the gender and social inclusion lens. So the game basically allows for players to have an immersive experience, putting themselves in other people's shoes. So it looks at how you would respond to different climate hazards based on your age, I want to say race, gender, and your socioeconomic status. The game also explores the difference that can be made when members of the community come together and work together to improve their situation. So, one of the ways in which us as evidence, actually climate change practitioners, we can really see the value in intersectional approaches is by meeting people where they are. So, in the game, we've got the game has different settings. So you're either holding a game where the community is affected by drought or the community is affected by flooding. And in the game, we've got community workers, environmental workers that basically want to have meetings with the community, already set up meetings with the community without an initial community consultative process, and people in the community have not attended the meeting. So the card that you're holding then becomes your character. On the card, you've got your age, you've got your socioeconomic status, and this informs how you then participate in the game. So when the community worker basically approaches you, you have to basically step into the shoes of that character. You become that person, and you have to explain as to why you think that person did not actually why you did not attend the meeting, because you then become that person in your character card. So the game is really a great tool because it allows us to then explore those different intersectional issues that come up in the space that we find ourselves. We get to see in the lens of people's different lived experiences. We get to explore people's motivations, and we also get to just a different feel of the information that we didn't know. So yeah, I don't know if you guys have all seen the cards yet. Yeah, and if we had enough time, we would play, but unfortunately not. Yeah, so just to conclude on the importance of on intersectional approaches, is that the knowledge of diversity of experiences, motivations, and knowledge held by different communities is critical in creating comprehensive solutions in tracking evidence, and yeah, which is useful for our work. And if you would like to know more about the game, you can chat to me afterwards, and yeah, we can keep in touch. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Gigi, sir, for being so brief and yet to be very on point, where we have seen this need for diversity of knowledge to understand the intersectional issues that we are talking a lot when addressing different problems that we are dealing with. Now I will move towards Amil to talk from the finance perspective. Yeah, Amil, over to you.
Great. Thanks so much, Tasvia, and good morning, everyone. My name's Emil Harikishan. I'm the Finance Thematic Lead for CDKN. I'll start off by saying that I'm actually an ecologist by training, so I'm going to talk to you about finance, but please don't direct your negative sentiments about the financial sector towards me. We're working to transform it. I wanted to give just a flavor and a few key messages to take away with regards to finance, how we think about finance and funding of the resilience of social ecological systems. And this is based on research, interviewing about 17 different practitioners, funding sources, etc., as well as a thought leadership piece I wrote with other colleagues when I was still with GRP, with Wellington Capital, looking at how we get private sector and corporate funding into financing resilience. So let's start off by saying first and foremost that social ecological systems really asks us to think across different scales, and within this there is an inherent challenge. So we're asking the financial sector or funders to start thinking about much larger scales than they may traditionally do. And this is also the challenge of transitioning away from just adaptation finance towards resilience finance. So how do we actually finance the resilience of systems? So not just looking at adaptation finance for discrete climate risks or shocks, but looking actually at the resilience of systems. And this is an inherent challenge. The second thing I'll say is that different sources of funding and finance derive value from different evidence and outcomes. And this is quite important. So whether or not you are a impact investor and you are interested in the social environmental outcomes or evidence that's produced by a given intervention, or you're a commercial bank or an institutional investor or government. So we need to actually understand that it is okay that there are different understandings or derivatives of value from some of the resilience investments or interventions that may be needed. The second thing, which is quite an important one, and this is one I think I want folks to take away with you, is that the financial sector, but also including other sources of funding, have not fully understood that nature cannot be neatly put into a box. There is a huge amount of contextual understanding, biophysical, ecological understanding, etc. And traditionally, for example, a development bank or even the private sector or government would think, for example, about infrastructure as asset classes. And they would then know how to be able to appraise new infrastructure investments, compare those infrastructure investments to one another, etc. We just do not have a robust enough evidence base yet of nature-based solutions to be able to do that. And so a lot of the evidence comes across then as anecdotal as opposed to being scientifically robust. So we know that mangroves reduce storm surge. But an institutional investor like an insurance firm is going to say, yes, but by how much? Because I need to put it into my actuary model to be able to know how to work out the premiums for this insurance product. We need to push the evidence into that space. How do we then also include non-monetary and qualitative dimensions of value? That becomes something that as we look at different stakeholders and what they value, and having then knowledge brokers and honest brokers bring those partners together, we can see that, yes, it is okay that different stakeholders derive different values, but how do we bring that together in a cohesive manner? So this leads me into mentioning that we still don't have a robust or standard approach to assessing economic and financial analyses. And again, this links to how do we include non-monetary and qualitative dimensions of value. The last thing I'll say before moving on, and I think this is quite a crucial one that many of us in this room, irrespective of what work we do, can play a role in, is that the financial sector and funding sources are now having to engage with non-traditional stakeholders. So if you are a downstream private sector water utility who now wants to invest in the resilience of your water catchment, you now need to potentially engage with upper catchment local government, farmers, etc. That just may not be something you have a mandate to do, have ever done before, and know how to go about doing it. And you could also be perceived as a hostile stakeholder when trying to engage, because you're a large downstream water utility who's now trying to tell farmers to do things better. There's a huge role here, again, for knowledge brokering and for honest brokers to convene these types of partners. So a lot said, but hopefully we can also unpack some of this during the discussion, and I'll leave it there for now. Thank you. Tasvia?
Thank you so much, Amil, for bringing into this perspective as well as challenging us on this that how to include this evidence, robust evidence, as well as the qualitative data that we value a lot into like more scientific manner, like concrete manner, so that we can communicate this with the broader level of stakeholders. And I think that brings like kind of solution that we can hear from Ashutosh, that if he can give us a way of like how to engage all these data sets. I know that you are working with the big data, but also like if there is any way for like also working like with the qualitative data set, that will be also great. So yeah.
Thank you again. My name is Ashutosh Limay. I work for on a project called Servier. I have a couple of slides. I broke the model. Can we pull it up? Um, I sent it in, but I could talk to it. So Greg actually started us down this road. I don't even know, 10 years ago, 8 years ago, where we started looking at how does satellite data set and how do satellite products help evaluate some observations on the ground that could lead to us quantifying resilience. So we started looking in Ethiopia, in the Tigray region. We had some really interesting results, and then we went on to go to Niger, and that's why I just want to connect. I work for Servier. It's a NASA USA joint partnership to bring satellite data sets to improve decisions in Servier regions. We are active in 6. We are about to. There are different ways we connect the satellite data sets and products for informed decisions. Our tagline is connecting space to village, and I'll give you an example. In West Africa, USAID has invested in in significant amount of half moon constructions, where the money is given to the farmers, and they build these 1 meter, so super small semicircles, and you just dig the ground and form a little depression for whatever little rain that falls. It goes in there, and the soil moisture goes slightly higher, and you can build you can grow crops that have more resilience, basically because you have chances that your moisture will stay longer, will be viable. And so WFP had some fantastic data sets where they actually knew which fields worked in what year, the money was given and constructed and all that. And so we looked at satellite data sets and evaluated. There were 18 sites, over 100 fields that we looked at, and we saw a crystal clear difference of evidence on how the vegetation changed. So before that, so typically the problem is you do a project, you don't know what happened there before. Well, with the satellite data sets, you do have a history that you can go back to 82 or 72, depending on what data set you want, and look at how the landform has changed. So we looked at all that historical data, and then once that construction happens, how does the vegetation change as a result of this intervention? And then what we found that it was 50%, slightly more than 50% higher vegetation in those fields. Well, but that's not the big picture. The big picture is when there are shocks. If you see, it's a drought year, and we have some control sites. So those sites were developed through years. So some were developed in 2012, 2015, 2018, whatever. So we used the areas that were developed in 2018, we used from 2012 to 2018 as control sites because they were worthy of development but not quite developed yet. So we could use those control sites and the actual construction and then what happened beyond. So we could do this really nice before-after counterfactual exercise, and we found out that the response to shocks was dramatic. So in a controlled environment, before the interventions took place, the change in vegetation was much more, it took longer for the vegetation to bounce back, whereas the intervened areas could quickly bounce back. And that, so now we are connecting that to crop yields and more interesting stuff, hopefully. But I just wanted to share this, that we have this satellite data set that can look at, this is just one example where we are connecting satellite data sets to look at changes in vegetation on the ground and how that can be used to define. Right now we are doing this in an evaluation sense, but we could conceivably do this in a prognostication sense, that if we put something here, what will the impacts be? And then using that information could be really powerful in designing projects and could lead to a quantifiable change that is independent of our opinions. Thanks.
Thank you so much. I think this also opens up a lot. I think some of you may have questions on this as well. So we will go for a round of question answer after our last presentation, and then we will go directly. But I will just encourage all the participants here to have the question out of these presentations, not going so far, because we have some sets of questions to explore in our group activity part as well. So yeah, now Sumit, over to you. Do you need the slides, right? Yeah? Yeah, you just start.
Okay, thank you. Is it on? All right. So yeah, I've been warned of the 5 minutes, and I think I have some 25 slides, but I'll go quick. I put this together yesterday because a lot of people asked me what is PlanAdapt. So there's a few slides explaining what PlanAdapt is. It's a global network of professionals, and we work together, and we want to, have impact on the ground, but it's not always easy if you're stuck in the COVID lockdown, or you've moved 3 times into another new country. So these are professionals, and we are connected virtually, and we work mostly through online platforms and projects. Yeah. So people who struggle with the impacts of climate change and climate injustice, particularly in the global south. So our focus of most of our work is from the global south. And what do we aim to improve? Sorry, these will keep coming up. Walking the last mile of knowledge transfer and learning. So we claim to be both sector experts individually, as well as performing knowledge brokering functions, taking knowledge to places where it is most needed, and helping to make adaptation knowledge beyond academic and expert circles. So I just want to go through a couple of projects, because I noticed that yesterday and before that, when we were on our tables in the World Cafe, the conversations led from SES to NBS and EBA. So I thought, since we are, and what I could have also spoken to is producers and users of knowledge, because that's what we discussed. But I'm just going to show a few projects as a flavor of how we have tried to incorporate local knowledge, even though we were working virtually. So this is an urban EBA working group that was established in COVID times, and it tried to look at there being limited information online about examples of urban EBA measures, right? Urban EBA means ecosystems-based adaptation in urban areas. And we came together as researchers and practitioners and looked at what are practical examples of urban EBA planning and implementation. Can we come up with some of those? And we also, somehow through our conversations, came up with a climate justice focus. So key challenges: not enough practical information, climate justice perspective not always taken into account. So what does practical information mean? That it should be local and actionable in the urban context in our case, and from the global south. So yeah, so for climate justice aspects, we looked at appropriateness of knowledge, right? Who are the most marginalized groups of people? They are also the most vulnerable. And then scientific and indigenous knowledge frames envision EBA in different ways. How do we bring that together? And that's one of the jobs of a knowledge broker. So we made a survey, we sent it around, and we got some 33 responses. As you can see, they were from different parts of the world. Everybody was stuck at home. So that was to our benefit. This is during lockdown and COVID times. And then finally, we worked through filtering this knowledge around some criteria that we had developed to yield 7 principles And this is the joint technical publication that we had with all these partners. Again, my clock is ticking. So these were some of the EBA solutions that came up. I was asked yesterday, what besides urban agriculture can be done, which is an urban EBA? And these are not just from the global north, they are from the global south, which is developing countries, Asia, Africa, Latin America, restoring original hydrological regime, removal of alien species, for example. And you will see some of these are in more formal areas and can be planned in, like they can be part of urban planning endeavors, while others, such as ecological corridors, require more city-level interventions, probably regional. Urban forests and parks, again, you have to engage province, time. So again, some of more physical measures, but I think what I wanted to leave you with is social principles of urban EBA that we looked at, because the responses we got focused on how much were women involved, what kind of capacity building was happening, and equity, fairness. And these are just some examples from projects that were shared with us, and we collated them. This is from Vietnam. This is from Bogota. South Africa and Durban, a project that some of us have been quite acquainted with Catherine Sutherland and Patrick Martel. So this is an acknowledgement slide. All the authors and contributors. We also did an ecosystems-based flood management in sub-Saharan African cities project, which, I'm going to end soon. But this was more an example of knowledge co-production. And we will be showcasing this in September in the African Climate Week. That's the first time we'll be meeting in person with the officials that this report was intended for. Just to show quickly here, okay, it's just going forward. So recommendations and city thinking. I think there's one more. This is an evidence review. Maybe this can be discussed during our group work we did for the ARA, good practices for action-oriented adaptation research, and how we can bring in the resilience lens from this. So I'll leave you here and happy to take questions later. Thank you.
Just put it here. Thank you. I think this last presentation opens up a diverse sets of range of issues, how to work with actors, in what processes, in which capacities to address what needs possibly. But I just would like to very quickly go for our audience, that if you have any very quick questions for our speakers because they have all covered a sets of issues, and they have tried to talk from like the evidence user's perspective, like different sorts of community needs and priorities. So does anyone? Okay, I see lots of hand. I'll go to that one. Okay, I have 3 lineups. So.
Hi, I'm Ria. I had a question for you, Dr. Ashutosh. I was wondering, are there any sort of publicly available satellite data sets that are fine enough that you can actually read change in vegetation on smaller sites?
Yes, all of the NASA datasets and most of ESA datasets and JAXA datasets and some of Indian datasets, they're all freely available. The question is small, how small? So the longest datasets that we are, the harmonized Landsat Sentinel, which is at 30-meter resolution, is available globally. If you want finer resolution, which we do have technology, but legally we cannot construct because we are public sector and we cannot go finer than 10 meters. So we don't have those, but we have strong partnerships with commercial players like Maxar and Planet, and we have done a lot of stuff with them to see at 50 centimeter, 1 meter, 5 meter resolution. But again, I mean, those, because we happen to have some unique ways to acquire those data sets, those may not be publicly available, and that's the part of the problem. But if there are specific use cases, then we can explore what solutions there might be. You had a specific resolution in mind, or?
So I was thinking around the range of 5 to 10 meters,
Okay.
because that's when you can really see vegetative growth.
Right.
But that's hard to, find anywhere publicly available.
Freely available.
Freely available.
Yeah.
It's more appropriate.
And not even the long-term data set. So you can't have a
Yeah,
40-year
exactly.
data set.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, maybe just to speak to the power of the NASA data. So the reason I asked you to do that is I was in Tigray, Ethiopia, under the Trump administration with a senior Trump official. We showed him what had happened in this area through a series of investments. He said, I don't see it, and he got back in the car and got back on his phone. And as soon as I got back to Washington, I called my colleagues at NASA, and I said, you need to go back 30 years in time and show me how landscape transformed, and not only that, stop in drought years and show me what was different over time as a result of this investment. 6 months later, that same official, Jim Richardson, stood up at a meeting of all African ambassadors, US ambassadors, and said, this is what USAID can do. So the power of that picture was extraordinary.
Thank you.
I have a question for you as well. Actually, I have two questions for you. One, I was very fortunate to participate in the Productive Safety Net back in 2007 to 2010, so I understand in Ethiopia the power that this information and these types of intervention can have. So what I'm wondering is, I was talking to another participant in the conference, and they said that conflict can take out everything. So I'd like to have your assessment of what's happened to Tigray and to the area where we put in major investments as a result of the conflict in Tigray. And then the other side of my question is, I know that your motto is space to village. What I'm seeing is village to space. What I would like is a better explanation and maybe some evidence from you that says, how do you use your data and how do you use this information to either do project siting or to be able to identify the most vulnerable areas, to really do that space to village. So that's where I've just felt a bit of a disconnect in working with Severe in the past.
Okay.
Thank you.
Sounds good. So maybe we can talk offline, but just to answer the first part of the question, it is challenging to connect. So we are a needs-driven organization, so we are only responding to what is needed rather than there are plenty of people out there who can have their solutions ready and just throw over the fence and saying, this fits. So we are exploring ways of how we can connect satellite data sets for a meaningful quantification of change. And we are doing this with Takunda and CARES. So we are working on expanding that kind of thinking and connecting how satellite data sets could be used. So far, we have used it in an evaluation sense, but we want to use it in a more prognostication and predictability that if you do this here, what the impact would be, and we are gearing towards that. Thank you.
Here we can see one hand, and okay, you have another question.
Great. Hi, my name is Genevieve. I just have a really quick comment. A caution about the power of the picture and the power of data if it's not contextualized in terms of the nature of that biome or that region. So for example, in our pursuit of wanting sustainable financing and looking at the opportunities in the carbon markets, you see a lot of pictures of Africa where look at the opportunity for Africa to become green, or in South Africa, look at the opportunity for carbon, but our natural ecosystems don't have a high NDVI or high greenness, and it's actually a degradation of the system when you see that enhanced carbon, because what you're really looking at is bush encroachment or woody invasive alien species. So just a caution to keep, I think it was Emil who said, let's keep nature in mind and understand the picture and not get wrapped up in the power of it in our pursuit of a silver bullet solution. Thanks.
Amit, does he want to respond? Do you want to respond it first? Okay. Okay, I think you can.
Yeah, I think it was more of a comment, but I think that's an excellent point. And this, I think, links to also what I was talking about in terms of building up a robust evidence base as well. So moving from what may be perceived as anecdotal to something that is more entrenched in data and evidence. And for example, the in situ data we have from certain ecosystems may be from Asia, but now we're looking at implementing mangrove restoration on the east coast of Africa. And how does that translate across, understanding scales of that as well. So from a finance and investment point of view, if I invest in restoring 100 hectares of mangroves and it gives me X benefit potentially for storm surge, what happens if I invest in 200 hectares or 100,000 hectares? How does that scale? Is it linear? Is it exponential? Is there a certain point by which I decide no longer to invest in it because I'm not deriving any more benefit? And then actually, how can we bring in public sector and others who will then continue to invest in larger scale restoration? So we need to unpack, again, that differentiated value and priorities. And then how do we bring together more innovative and non-traditional partnerships for things like EBA, etc. But yeah, thanks.
I was just going to ask abuse my moderate. I'm not even a moderator. I'm just helping out in this session. But what really struck me is the scale at the kind of the decision making and the evidence that's being used. And I wondered if each of you could reflect on some of the tools and approaches or users and producers that you heard from each other. So I'd really be interested to hear, like, do you think you could use the role-playing game in combination with the tool that you're using, or similarly the role-playing games for understanding intersectional issues, which bring in the more qualitative data to partner with some of the satellite imagery? And I wondered whether you could see potential for that. And if it's a way to bring some of these tools together with also different decision makers to try and think through some of the issues that might be at play. Don't know who wants to tackle that first.
Yeah. Any volunteer to start? Okay, you can start.
Thank you, sorry. Yeah, I was actually going to respond to what Amil was saying in response to what you queried. I think that is why involving local people and local scientists is very critical, because an image can speak much more or many other things to them than, I don't want to say outside, but a professional with another kind of an eye or perspective. So I wouldn't speak to the game necessarily, but it does remind me of our ASAR project, where when we started out with researchers, but after having been to various sites in both South Africa, Kenya, and India, the perspective changed completely, because the wealth of information that was generated from speaking to local people was immense. And I think I kind of thought when your topic was open data, I thought maybe you'll help us find a way to bring in local knowledge, right? And maybe there is a way. So I would really be interested in that integration. Yeah, thank you.
No, I think just for me, I would say yes, definitely. And so I think because the game is also quite local, quite community based, it does bring in that when looking at the range of presentation, it looks at that pulling of appropriate evidence from appropriate audiences as well. So it goes from the local and up till the global, really. So yeah.
So I just want to add to the game that you shared with us. So we have used a not as polished as this, but we could use some techniques that I see on these cards to improve what we have been doing, and that is to talk to farmers or talk to government officials on index-based insurance, and how do you take risks? What is the value of insurance? And to illustrate that, we have the simple game that we have devised, and maybe we could do this role playing. That is really cool. But I see real value in better communicating through what you have done in communicating knowledge of forecasts and observations, and how that makes our decisions possible and the risks we take. So thank you for sharing this card. It was really useful.
Great, thanks. I just wanted to touch on satellite data, because I think it's inevitable that satellite data will become a major source of data and evidence for nature-based solutions and EBA, etc. But and something folks can follow up with after the session. But the Mangrove Action Project, based in the US, has done incredible work on transforming the way mangrove restoration works. Typically, how it was done before was monocultures of mangroves planted in rows. So your satellite data may actually pick that up as increased mangrove cover. But those mangrove restoration projects fail because they're just fundamentally not based in the ecology of how mangrove ecosystems work. And so the Mangrove Action Project pioneered an approach called community-based ecological mangrove restoration. Go look it up, it's really great. And that's actually then bringing together some of the considerations that Zizi was talking about with community-based, locally led adaptation, and actually then working with the ecological principles of mangrove restoration that may take longer to see that mangrove tree cover, but you're building a more resilient, ecologically sound ecosystem. And so I think there are then, again, the need for this knowledge brokering across what is being valued. So if you, as a funder, just want to see increased mangrove cover, you might say, great, we got a satellite image that says we can tick this box. But if you are a local government that wants to ensure local communities are benefiting from that ecosystem restoration, or if you are an ecologist or somebody focused on conservation outcomes, you may want to know that actually the biodiversity in that ecosystem is actually what you're prioritizing. So I just wanted to mention again that these different forms of knowing and knowledge and how valuable they can be. But yeah, the ecologist inside of me is always like satellite data. I'm always a bit skeptical, but it will inevitably become incredibly important. Thanks.
Thank you so much. If there's any burning questions for the speakers, please grab them after the session to like have a one-to-one conversation, that I'll say. So basically, I have seen that our board is kind of getting full, and we want to have this section is like with some finding like final reflections on the issues we would like to address in the form of evidence producers versus evidence users, and we would like to take some action steps basically so that we can go for our next steps. So we would like to find some opportunities or yes, like way forward, something like that. So now we have a group exercise. I would like to encourage the room to divide into two groups. We have a board. First, we would like to highlight the challenges or like gaps in terms of evidence producers and evidence users. So you can put down the stickies that are placed there and put down your thing. You can, if you're working with the communities, you can talk from users' perspective, or like if you're providing information to the communities, you can talk from the producer perspective and identify the challenges here. But we won't focus much on the much on the challenges. In the next page, we have the same format for identifying the enablers or amplifiers to address those challenges, and then we would like to find 3 to 4 key opportunity points or like way forward points. I'd just like to request my colleague Nadia to share a bit of reflection of some of the issues that came out in the house session, the tools methodologies that might helpful for you to start with the discussion. But I think the presentations that were done today by the speakers also laid some of the factors of issues, challenges of the users, producers. So yeah.
Thanks, Tasvia. This is just because we wanted to connect the whole session. So the conversations that we were having yesterday, bring them into how we understand what evidence we need to produce, who are the users and the beneficiaries, or not beneficiaries, but who can benefit from having that evidence. So we had one of the anchor things that we spoke about yesterday was the need to appreciate issues related to equity and justice. And some of those different dimensions have been captured here. And we spoke a bit about the importance of understanding distributive dimensions. So that's really how are benefits and burdens shared in terms of decision making. So how do we bring that into understanding what evidence we need to make sure that certain communities aren't privileged over others, and the benefits can flow in a more equitable way? How do we think about recognizing different worldviews, different knowledge holders, and also bringing different people and being more inclusive in the way that we design processes? And so this is really just to give a little bit more depth to how we think about the evidence that we might need, and also the evidence that we can start thinking about collecting. And so yesterday in the activity, we highlighted a whole lot of different tools. So people reflected on the work that they were doing, some tools that were specifically good for addressing some of these different dimensions of equity. So just to hold that when we're thinking of some of the challenges, and also some of the opportunities, because I think there are lots of opportunities to kind of bring evidence users and producers maybe together. Also think of the questions and some of the problems that we need to jointly start tackling. So this was just to try and hold some of the conversations that happened yesterday. So for people that weren't in the room yesterday, we really want to think of, when we're thinking of social ecological systems, we're not just thinking of social and ecological, they are connected. And it's really important to think about justice. And we can also think about kind of justice and equity for the environment as well. So how can we make sure that we include nature in decisions that are being made? So that's just a little kind of, a link to try and bring the conversations we had yesterday into today. So maybe we can break into those groups. There's an imaginary line running between maybe here.
Can we find it online?
I can give you a business card. You can find it online, and I'll give you a business card to you. Dual identities.
So amazing.
a lot of that is actually getting some of the action done. And I feel like that's kind of been a bigger challenge than just like knowing what the dynamics is wherever you feel it. So kind of a little bit users maybe the implementation, the information gets delivered to users.
So I'm Surati. I almost presented on this topic today, but I thought I want to have another time. It's called the role of the knowledge producer. So in terms being said, in my mind, the evidence producers and users may not be two different sets of people.
So you might be measuring your performance, but what are you measuring
Communities produce
to make sure you're not
users
exceeding
and use it as well. So what is the role of knowledge producers when they work with funders, when they work with communities, and when they work with implementing organizations?
gathering evidence about elements of the system, measuring impacts on the conflict. So I don't know where that fits in. It's a challenge, right? You've got limited money to measure things. You need to be gathering evidence, and in order for that to be robust, you need to have evidence both about the actions you're taking, the impact they're having, and also how things are changing other factors that are involved. There are many assumptions on the basic scientific methodologies which are not very useful to use in our
So effective communication.
So maybe it's about giving the whole picture, and then different categories of data.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's always, maybe it's always fully contextualizing the evidence.
some aspects of
The evidence needs to tell the whole story.
whether you're having an intended impact using your own kind of understanding of
The way that evidence is produced, there's little community process.
I just wanted to point that
Producers from evaluation, what is the evidence process?
Yeah. So just because vegetation is higher doesn't mean it's more edible. Well, the same can be, so what she said could be used as a user.
They just wanted to remain
lag effects and time frames.
So it's the producer perspective, but that actually falls under both producer and user. We really shouldn't be discussing local understanding, the discussions, when you're doing them, because in
Time scales.
very superficial type of engagement, like let's just talk about this.
But I think even when you can't, there was an inclusive arts space that we wanted to create this constantly like was because I think when you're driving outcomes, I suppose it's metaphors in how to deal with that inaccessible. But I think
The biggest challenge is just really not going to reach all audiences, and it's not like I think we can't reach all audiences, like local communities.
And then I think also when you
and I would also like to achieve
Evidence producing organizations all the information can be out.
So would you call this a user perspective?
I
Well, it's something that the producers have to be
Mindful.
they have to be ready. The producers have to be ready to create solutions about being happier outside of traditional.
I think I started to be wondering if we needed a green line so that even like creating user benefit green nations, like having the idea of what you know co-creating with all that.
Yeah, what you said, the disconnect between what is needed and what is being produced. Unless there is that active dialogue, you're on different planes and it's never gonna exist. You'll do a lot of, there'll be a lot of heat, but there will be no light that comes out.
The thing of what you're saying, for example, and then we talk a lot about supposed to benefit or may end up getting how the
Often also part of the process of data collection or sort of
looking at James McLean. I'm from Europe, working in University of Europe. I'm looking at the military statement. Then the issue with one is the knowledge transfer. Most times at the policy document, then the transfer of knowledge between the community and stakeholder is not balanced, so that will also cause a little problem as well. Let's say, for instance, where I come from,
I was going to come from the same place.
we got this document on
school
gender transformation. It's a nurse policy document, but the implementation is not there. And so in there, they want to find community and stakeholder is not balanced. So we need to create that knowledge gap.
You could engage one-on-one specific set of access, but how do you scale it? So it's a very tricky balance.
Yeah, maybe it goes through multiple scales to get to different user groups.
was from producers uncertainty, right? Evidence coming from climate development models, not like
and then I sort of put it down and it comes back to how we both said, like the power of global mass, right? In terms of allocating resources, finance, etc. Like I think that's something to really take into account when you're reducing at the global level. You actually have a responsibility. I've seen discussions in science that go on about like, you can't science journal, sorry. Like you can't
is challenging
like
for
that
producers
comes out
to use it
where
to use anything or like translate anything or like transfer anything. So yeah, so that is also
responsibility. Well, actually, no, maybe this is the best idea out there, so that is us in forest. They're like, oh, but we're just producing the maths. Like it's down to the local sort of managers to make decisions. Like that's impossible when finance is in these maths. Like yeah, recognizing that power of evidence at that global level.
It would be so interesting to track how powerful is math. Based on that map, has there been investment in restoration, or not even restoration, healing?
It never is, right? It's always moved. And there's always like local context is everything. Just satellite data from any data tells you just one part of the story unless you contextualize it. I have a colleague who says satellite data.
I think that's a little bit better because of how it's set at least. Yeah, I don't think it totally relies on it. I think it's actually the implementation that tends to lie because that's where the power of evidence starts to come in. So I don't think it's at that strategic level. I would still say definitely in terms of how we then implement these frameworks, then it applies to this particular area.
to justify why. So what is going to happen? Okay, so there is a lot of teams and things like that. You've collected that, you've seen the patterns from vegetation experiment. So there's two evidence, and it's also is the issue. Maybe publication, please.
So yeah, so just role-based as a game. That's a really effective way to, because we can ask as finance budget, unless the light bulb happens on the other side, it just means our EDU. Unless the light bulb happens on the other side, I think those games are very effective in making sure the light bulb happens from that side. And it may not be the light bulb. So why are we doing intentionality? Why are we doing what we're doing? Is it to produce a report, which is one way, but it's how do you connect it to action on the ground, the impact?
So they
Can I have your attention? Let's just for some time. Thank you for taking part during this time.
So I could participate because it's
as we have
producing the
identified
maps
some key
and also
challenges,
that jargon
they are
in terms
briefly
of the
overlapped as well,
production
so
of
I've just
information
quickly
or
tried
getting
to
evidence
brief
is, you
in
know,
the way that
it's
they are coming.
very
Also,
you
one
can
of our
generate different
participants
evidence
mentioned that
if you
should
change the way
we
that you
go
speak
for
out, what
producer
you need, what
user
you
like
produce, how you run
separately
the
or
process.
let's pick that one? Yeah, that is debatable. But just
So
because that
I
has
have
to be
was
produced and then that has to be used, that's why I have done that. So I'm totally okay with putting that this as one point, but just to actually have something going. So we have done this. So on the evidence producers, what we have so far collectively discussed is that there are issues of connections, different sources of evidence from the producers, and big data versus global evidence. That is also with the producers and the big data challenges, and thus the need of contextualizing evidence in ongoing changes. Dealing with the flux is one part that I'll hand it over to you maybe go in for a little bit elaboration with description for the book. But then also when we are talking about this disconnection between what is being produced versus what is needed, I think that this is also coming down to both of the ends, so that's why I put this middle, that critical for co-creating co-developer uptake. But how can we scale? So that point came down. So and from there, this effective communication of data produced, how to communicate to all the users, and importance of ground truthing the data with communities. But it's also like, I think it's also like this correctly. The science, I'm sorry.
I paraphrase what you were
I'm so sorry. Okay, then lack of local understanding of resilience can lead to mismatch of data and need. Both came down, and I think this is also kind of a user-producer communication. So I put this in the middle, and from there, making local knowledge visible to the knowledge users, and initiatives to collect data, need for more participatory approaches. So I think this also comes up like the how is like from the power of producer
power and how it, you know, constrains or enables certain
providing that.
processes.
So I just put
There's
that
power
here,
in the
that
big
we are
math,
okay
but
to
there's
shift that
also
down.
the
On the
benefits from
diffuser,
the outcome of what
there's like
decisions are made
bias
based on
and
that math.
hijacking
And
on
then
that
some of the
enough
politics
that
around
what
sharing who
what
gets
solutions
included,
sorry,
which has
what
led to some of the
data
conversations on the dimensions
are
of
we
justice.
So this is really interesting though, because we're only
user
really
that
talking
you actually
about
mentioned
kind of
about that,
implementation
that
projects
part?
where
So like,
money
is it
funds
part
of
of it that
development
budget
come in
tools?
and
So
want
that's
to
why bias and hijacking funding,
the
the
program.
concept
So
like
on the other side,
nature
there's also the access
outcomes
to strategic
of like
evidence.
within
Because
the
I've
evidence
been working with a
users,
community in
like
Northern
how are we
Malawi
treating
that
that?
actually
That
wants
these
to do
things are very
woodland
hard
restoration,
to
right? But they're too
take from
small,
the
can't
community
fill
and
in
like
the
put in
50
the
pages
producers
that
that this group has
WWF needs
discussed,
in order to
and the
access whatever
interpretation of
funding is,
evidence,
you know, so that
translating
very
it to
much
the
bottom up. Like we know that
decision
this could be
makers.
done well, it's community
The
led, but
evidence is not
they're
always
not getting
tangible
the
in
US
practice
aid or
and on the
kind of
ground.
funding. So how
So
do
this
they
is
get
also hard
access
in
to
the users
the
end.
sorts of evidence
And
and
data
information
management
that
and
they need to
curation,
actually just
yes,
produce anything in the
longevity and
background if they want to run
replicability,
outside
right?
of some big
So repeatability. So yes, data management and curation is very, yeah, because in the local, in the community level, actually this is true. Also the communities gets like shifting due to different hazards. Like you go to the community after 2 years, you sometimes do not find them as well. So there is problem of data management there in that sense, as well as the data that they are intelligent with,
now is more
they
expensive
do
in
not
South Africa.
record it like properly
So
because
then
they do not know
then
what's
depends
going to
what you
happen
pay
next.
through that grant.
So
If
we can
people
come
are
down
already
here.
ready to volunteer,
Sometimes
but they
there,
can't fund
if we
some
agree
additional
with all
things,
these challenges,
then perhaps that grant
are
can
we
be
good
used.
with going
I'm
for
not saying
these
they mustn't try to track
as
USA,
well as the
but if it is out of
verifiers
reach right
for
now,
the
at
producers
least
users?
something can
I
be
do
done
not
in the
want to
meantime.
make
And I
it
just
more
wanted to say,
complicated.
coming
If
from
we
the
just
area
want to
again,
find
sorry,
count that as solutions,
in
or
addition
if
to
we
the
just want to go for
participatory
direct
processes
to the
that you
opportunity,
mentioned,
we're also good, very
perhaps
good.
addressing
So
fears
just
and
the
concerns
challenges that are
through
being
radical
addressed, I
and
think
inclusive
food actually
conservation.
is
So I
coming
think
as a,
participatory is a
but
very
how
nice
it
mellow
will be
term.
used, like if we have
People
some
come,
more
they participate,
conservations
box gets
for
kicked.
building
But I
social
agree radical to unearth some of the real
I was just wondering,
fears that she was
for the
mentioning
previous
rather than
research,
reduce the water.
how do we
For that, the
position nature
conservation
in
has
that?
to be
Because I feel that
inclusive
we
over
are,
long time
I
period.
suppose,
So it's not just about participation.
yeah,
It's
that's
also
why there's a
politics
non-work
because it's kind
I'm
of linked
less
to
familiar with
how
the
they will
social
find lock-in.
SES approach.
Yeah.
And I would like to know how we speak
okay. Yeah,
for
radical, you've got it there.
the natural world
I'll
that
go
can't
on.
speak for
So
itself
it's
in
one of
this,
the attributes
in
of
this,
nature
but I don't have
sustainability
answers.
paper, but adaptive learning, and I'll put adaptive learning bit into
so
it.
I'm also not
And how we do
very
this across
familiar with the
scales and
SES
stakeholders.
framework.
So not sort of seeing just evidence producing
What's the
evidence
practical
users, but how actually
application of this? How would you
more
develop
cycle
it to
of
actively
adaptive
design
learning
and co-design?
And I'd say that's a challenge,
So
but I
last
think
night
there's
I
an
got the
opportunity for
wayside
then
waypoints,
equity and
yeah.
inclusion. So
Waypoints, yeah.
got us.
Okay.
I'm going to put it here uncertainty as well.
Which
Find a
sounds
way
very
to
similar
manage some of the uncertainty is to kind of stop
planning approach that I'm familiar with, which is the
I find adaptive learning often just gets like thrown in as an afterthought, like when you're thinking about like the resilience of systems, like diversity, redundancy, or modularity, connectivity. Those ones get spoken about more, and at the end it's like, oh, and adaptive learning.
what is it
Yeah,
that
but
we're,
that's super important to
that we're trying
understanding
to
all the other
protect
attributes.
or
It's almost
change?
like
What are the things
underpinning
we care
all
Do you
of
think
it.
that's because of the history of the
for
resilient
nature
community that started off by physical and slowly they're learning more and more about the importance of social processes? Because if you look at some of the early resilience principles, they power doesn't feature a lot of these other things don't feature, but more and more the recognition of these other forms of these other important attributes that sort of facilitate or
I mean, even relatively, you should just be like monitoring and evaluation, and slowly they added in power at the end of that, so monitoring, evaluation, and learning. But as when you look at project implementation, it's still monitoring, evaluation, and learning happens like after all, everything that is done, and then they're like, what did we learn from doing this 3-year project? And like, no, but what about adaptive management? How you could have learned continuously, so that you don't get to the end of it, and you're like, oh, well, let's do a lessons learned.
I think that's the best way
of project.
to
Um,
I think what they're trying to do to converse, to reverse that, is bring in monitors and evaluators as learners of the project. So if they learn along with the project what's going on, then they can
fill out the one thing, then you should follow this thing. Because it's when they are not in work for 2 years bring new information, that, we want to, what have I been doing if it's not visible yet? So get the MNE people to become the learners.
Yeah, it's almost a parameterization.
Yeah.
Approach to your data.
Sometimes
So
you need
for
to
everybody that's involved in the project to also be the learners. And so the M&E people can help us frame the questions that we need to reflect on. But it's so hard. Like I know the business and doing work in those meeting with different actor groups, and then somebody is like, let's take half a day to reflect and learn. I don't have half a day. So how do we change that? Like, so it's part of, this is work. It's not an extra, this is part of your
say
work.
that. I think that perhaps, sorry to interrupt. By using and I think simplifies. Let's treat every problem as a one, like the producer user group. How to bridge knowledge actually we identified some points on these solutions to address the gaps that we have highlighted. Because even if it's the producer gaps, they still link with the communicating or translating or transferring that with the user. Same for the user group. Even if that's the user encounter and challenges that we are saying, it is kind of like how they can take that forward, like in the upper level. So can we treat that as like just find out some opportunities to address those blind spots or gaps of evidence users that we can do. We do not need to think from
Often
it.
socializing, modeling, evaluation, reflection, and learning.
Yeah,
Because that's what it's.
that's
One of the ways,
but let's not go for enable or simplifies. I think that
one
we
of the
just
very
need
practical ways we could do it, and obviously it requires donors and funders to actually get on board with this. It's open budget. So you have flexibility in your budget to be able to pivot. Because then it incentivizes people to actually try and learn and reflect and be like, well, we can actually change our activities for the next 18 months. What would be able to change? But if we have rigidity in how it's designed, we will have rigidity in then the M&E, and then you can learn, but it's after everything's done.
The other way
Can
to
you
say
write
that
that on
could
a
be
sticky?
effective communication.
Hold on, Jen, I'm not
How
going to
do
take
we-
it from you yet
how do
because
we
you've got another whole sheet
take the successes or
opportunities. So enablers, amplifiers,
things that have
opportunities.
worked,
I think we probably need to start moving there
and how do
anyway,
we
given the time
translate that
constraints. But I want to
and
hear
scale?
about your sticky.
Explore ways to scale. I think that is where the real opportunity is. Because things are, it's not like things are not working anywhere. Things are working. How do we scale it up? That's the bigger question.
and at the same time the community is using these resources. So they are telling
And how do we scale to what actually happens?
how do we scale?
Then it's
Sustain
While keeping nature in mind. So there are these, you could add these caveats, but I think,
Yeah.
especially like in the
You're right.
schools. Like if you give the example of in our country there's a like cutting of trees and all that. Burning of chaff and using the trees and all that. Such as even some videos are made to there. So the community can impact to facing this
If you want to have, you can. And if I'm not capturing well, please let me know.
Well, that's so cool about
So we need to
demonstration of best practices in explanation specifically engaging one family and you assign things like that, those best practices.
So it's also about creating kind of like evidence and knowledge to
Speaks
support
volumes on
and
application
or to yeah.
I mean, one thing that struck me as we went through the music is,
Who needs this information? Neil, tell us what funders need. How are you going to make this stuff happen?
so that's like the bridging. And one of the
We've got 15 minutes.
I think the challenge is with reconciling the traditional and conventional ways that funders and financiers use information with the paradigm shift that's needed to better be able to consider nature. And so we can talk about what evidence they need now, but I think it's just about what evidence we think they will need working with them into kind of this paradigm. So, like, if we talk to an institutional investor like an insurer, like they're using actuary models and financial models, like giving them qualitative data is not going to be super useful for them. but how do we then consider what additional analyses you could do, like AI, for example, could actually be a way to analyze huge amounts of quantitative data that could then provide those qualitative analysis, like equivalence, that then it can be used, etc. So it's
No, so
evidence,
I'm
but
just
it's
curious.
also
What do you think is
decision
the role of the
making
insurance companies in the private sector?
that is reconcile
Do
these
you, do you,
differences
do
of
we,
how
is
they're
there,
currently
is there a,
in
are they effective brokers of this gap where
yeah, it's not
we can
necessarily
find
like
sustainable
yeah.
solutions?
You
Or
could say like, great, we need more
the,
in-situ data,
other,
so that you can
just within this group, not to leave, but the greed of the companies may overpower
duration or
the,
yes,
the society's good interest.
yes,
I'm just curious.
What is the decision making tool?
So I've got decision-making tools, but also systems thinking. I think that's what you're saying. And some of that is linked to the comments on contextual, like making sure it fit for purpose as well, and it fits the context.
So how do you encourage investment by the
Very
private sector?
few minutes left. Sorry, I've been terrible at keeping time.
The other is
Some
how
of
do
it
you
you
bring in
really
the
started
good
mentioning, I think, open
private
funding
sector, and I
as
guess the value
both an
chain
enabler and an
market
amplifier.
group are looking
And so often,
closely at that.
we wanted to start introducing
In
the
terms
notion of
of
scaling.
yeah,
because
non-exclusive
people always have
value chains that
and this
creates
investment scale, and it's always about scaling out and like doing
but
more.
it's somehow that
We
also
just
needs
need
to
to
be, I
replicate this
feel
in
the
other
private
places
sector
and
needs
just
to
do
be
more of these
mediated
projects instead
somehow.
of thinking
They
about how
shouldn't
you
be just
can
about
scale different. So sometimes the scaling is deep. You
But
need to change
that's not the way the private sector works, you know, so how do you knowledge brokers actually broker the
understand the
private
value of their
sector?
natural systems.
And maybe there is a
scaling
space
to
for
just
this.
brokers. So it's not always about you doing more and more and more of
One
the
of the
same
things we
thing.
can get better, and maybe an opportunity, is
So information is useful,
taking advantage
evidence
of
is useful for that, but it requires a different kind of evidence.
moments where there is a disaster, and suddenly those become more salient. And so if you use that opportunity to tell your story, if you've been building a case and gathering evidence,
I'm just trying to think
the
of ways
timing
for the
of when you
open
present
and
that,
both
there's a lot of opportunity
the
in
open
making it salient
funding.
after
Yeah.
a big
So I've done it pretty that way.
You, like you're
and
missing
maybe it
a step,
resonates more with the private sector
you just got
in that
producers and
context.
users, right? But actually,
And I don't know how this relates to
there is
evidence,
the
but
mechanism that's driving the production, right?
Yeah.
Which is this funding,
cost
this
recovery,
and so
the
changing
private
that.
sector. So
And
that's
then I
another
think
part of
also what
making
you
the
were
case is how
mentioning
they can
is
recover
the
costs
users
in the
are
long
diverse,
term
right? You have
by
users at the
being more
community level,
sustainable.
but also generators of knowledge versus
But
like
I think in terms of
the
governance,
funders, the
we need to be
finances,
thinking about
etc. The top
policies
down, bottom up. So I think just maybe we need some more dialogue.
our development trajectory goes hand in hand with our protecting our basic natural capital trajectory. And there you can have license to operate kind of mechanisms for the private sector. So the private sector wants to operate, they need to be doing offsets or so that as you develop it, as you're progressing and developing.
And if you go over there,
well,
maybe I think that's the different mix, right? That they're different users and they're different
And maybe we need to show,
that's also, that's not
more of
true.
that as
And so
business case.
there's,
So I think there's
yeah, some of it is around
to show where
successful and open
first
value
mover
chain
companies that are
connectors
doing that
by
kind of
which
thing are having
evidence
success,
is produced.
so that the rest of the private
Projects
sector
happen.
catches up more quickly with the first movers.
And promoting adaptive management, but it's not only for just the production.
Yeah, I'm
evidence,
talking about
right?
private
It's for all
sector.
sorts of
I
other
think
things
government
about,
should also provide some
different
incentives
outcomes.
to encourage the private sector.
This is your comment on diverse users.
No, no, no,
Because we
I'm
know that
trying to
private
differentiate the
sector
enablers from the
focus
Is making money.
is making money.
Yeah, I think so. The opportunities are more just around
They are
maybe the
more
next step. So like, what
Yeah.
can we take going forward once we've had these conversations? And this is like
So government
artificial,
should really
which we would
find
kind of
a
ask
way
to
to motivate
differentiate between the two.
that
But
way
it's a great thing to say
they're
it's
going
an
to have water
artificial
especially
boundary
from
sometimes.
private sector. Do they see that the cost is
Can be the
high
same thing.
and
I'm
there's no
just
support
thinking
from
maybe sorry that the
government and
open transaction opportunity.
it's very
Right, so maybe more of a, like if you manage to sort that out, then you can help.
I have a thing to address here.
A lot of the things
Just
that
to
are
like
So then I've got scaling, which is
ecosystems or environment
different.
or like working with EBA, NBS. I just wanted to understand that why government, like why there is a need for incentive or why do we
So
need
it's
to
a challenge,
change
but I
that?
think so.
If there is
Maybe
rigorous,
the socializing this is an
analysis of
opportunity.
this
The
natural
challenge
capital
is that
accounting
the now happens.
system services
Yeah, it's
accounting
like not
valuation
silos, but it's
not an
the job
economist,
of
but
somebody else that's not connected
I
to
think
the
for most of the
antisocial
I
now.
can tell that we cannot capture
it was around.
We cannot capture like hundreds of things because
What are
of
we
their
monitoring and evaluating?
non-economic
Like in the
funds
first
of
instance, like
valuation.
what we mean by
So
impact in
if we
uncertainty.
count
Like
something
that
as
to me
that,
always breaks my brain.
like
Like you say,
how
Mel,
much
yeah, super
money are
important.
you getting
Of
in
what?
terms
I
of
read a lab,
development
like the
if you like
the
invest,
causality of food production.
like destroying a
And maybe it's
natural
an
landscape
opportunity to like
versus
reframe
if you're protecting it, what sorts of revenue you're generating.
always a hard
reframe
one
what
for
we
me.
mean by
Cannot we
evidence in
show
the
that
context of
cost
not what is
benefit,
evidence.
like or like comparison
Okay.
for you know encouraging or motivating private sector, like is there any point of incentive towards funding government for that, or like can we just do like can anyone both quantitatively and valuation, like or like you feel like that
Because I think there's also a lot, I don't know if practitioners like gut feeling of that this could be potentially really useful.
I have an example
but,
that
like
goes directly to that. So,
Yeah.
so we produce this rainfall, global
sense,
satellite
yeah.
rainfall data sets that are
And you don't always have to
we make it public through our website.
It goes back to the conversation.
And we don't, the reason we built the website was for to partner with our user base, but it's public, so anybody can get and get it. So one of the people who would always write to us if the website goes down even for 15 minutes is this insurance company. And so we started asking, what do you need this? How do you use it? Because we didn't expect this to be using it. So, but they said, we are setting up rainfall-based insurance for drought. And so then that started us thinking, are we endorsing these products that may or may not be certifiable? Do they have the right guardrails? Are they being sanctions approved, or are they predatory? We have no control over these things. So there is a problem from the producer side that your data, when you make it publicly available, open, it could be used in nefarious ways that it ultimately comes back to you saying, not that it matters, we are trying to do social good, but there is another consideration that, how do we, so there is, so from a user, and that is, my concern is smaller from the producer side. From the user side, it's a bigger concern, because if I give $2 for this insurance product in hopes that they will cover me in my times of need, and if they're not there, or if their thresholds are too high, then I'm just putting my $2 for nothing. I'm not getting anything out of it. So there is that balance, and I don't know how do we get to a place where there is an incentive for them to make money. At the same time, there is
and I think with that, I just
it is doing
the research, the academic
acceptable
side, we say
societal
a lot
good.
of this,
And who defines that?
together, but like
It's just fascinating
are not
for
set
me
up
to
to
see
do that. Like
this
the
kind of
social
uses, and
capital that you need to have.
we don't have a, this is why
years
this
and
is
will
just
they
happening.
have,
And we don't have a
I
structure in
look
place
from the community
that will
side,
guide this.
finding
Is it
researchers
required?
that
Would the government,
and work
should the
with to
government
actually
require it?
really
That could
stuff
put
maybe
that
also
guardrail
not
that you were
easy,
talking
but
about.
there could be an opportunity
I think
just
also what's happening is
in
technology
serving
spends
that
so
bridging,
quickly that government
maybe like
regulation
networks,
takes
An
us
urban catch up.
actually looking at, we really want to do this work, we want to do it well, but we don't necessarily have this connection with communities. Trying to access
problem here in South Africa where
trying to actually
illegal
work with
plowing,
researchers who
that satellite imagery was not admissible evidence in court
sort of
to show that someone had
but
illegally
actually
plowed their
bringing those together, I think,
and it took it's taken years and years and years to
rather than a
that.
development actor coming in and saying, okay, we've identified
Just because you have data, just because you can produce something doesn't mean you can use it.
Go and come up with the project and then find a community to work with.
We never touched it.
You are one that's very interesting because a lot of times, anytime the private sector does something that is good, it's always considered corporate social responsibility, as opposed to putting at their very core of their business model, we will do, like I think McCormick said, we will do well by doing good. So,
And I think
paying
also
a fair
a great way
price
to
for your
address some of the
products.
stuff that
You know, I think about fair, whether it's
how hard it is to
farming
get
model,
people to think
paying
about
people for the work that they do, investing in the research, and the technical work that they do. Even when I was in Nepal,
to bring in some of those other
we
intersectional
had
issues.
as
really one of our objectives in our contract, and one of our objectives was we will work at reducing emissions. And our implementing partner, which is intermediaries, and that's really something that you have to sign, and you have to deliver. And some of the local aggregators were using women. They had data aggregated using highly marginalized women to collect bicycles
So I don't
and
think
sign
you need
up
another
every day
entity. I
and
think
deliver
with the
vegetables throughout
network
this
and the
very
trust,
urban
because I think
area.
communities
The
need to
vegetable
trust
dealer
research
just made me
people,
cry when I
right? Like
was
that doesn't
working a
come
lot with
overnight, but if
clients.
there
These
is
women
someone
were
that can
starting to actually
maybe
have
be a
a
bit
daily
more
income that was
trustworthy
reliable.
agent, and
They
can
were
also
able to
hold
work
to
a
account
reasonable
if it
number of
doesn't go
hours and
well,
make
right?
money.
Then
So
you're kind of
everybody
blacklisted because you
wins,
didn't actually do
but
what you said
still
you
the
were going to
private
do.
sector
You know,
person
some kind
considered
of
that part of his
mechanism around
social
that.
corporate responsibility as
Social
opposed to
capital,
being
trust
just
building,
another
bridging.
way
Fund business.
to do business and
Maybe
to
we
make
have
more money and to be
community
part of the
university
community. And so
partnership.
I think it's a real
And
challenge,
we also
and I think it's a
look
discussion
into
that
maybe
needs
sustainability
to happen
because
politically.
we will have continuous research work in the community which will also promote sustainability in the community.
I mean,
We
it's
will have
really
a good
hard to say
environmental
what the private
sustainability
sector
because you
is
always
to say
will
what they should
maybe after
and should not
if you the
do,
faculty
but
you
by,
got a grant
working with those
finish
who
with one
maybe are a
student,
bit more
maybe another group of
progressive and
students
being
will
able
also
to go with
carry
those
the
individuals
community.
to say,
So the
this
partnership
is
between the university and
important,
community just
why
continue.
why does it have to feel like
And
something
you make a
separate
plan,
as
right? We
opposed
know
to
with
just
funding
being a
that
way
it's 3 year
to
cycles and so on, but
improve
if
your
you
bottom line
jointly
and
communicate
ensure
and you're
employment
transparent and
opportunities
aware
and
of
have
that,
an
then,
overall impact.
okay, we're going to
Some
do this for
companies
3
are
years,
able
let's
to do
pull
that.
something out, let's try and find
Maybe
something
those
after
3 a
that,
day
we'll
is
try and
not
throw in an
my
honest
field, so
student
I don't
bridge if
encounter
we,
them. But you know how we always do
but you
best
can't just,
practices around
oh,
NGOs.
suddenly after 3 years, bye, it was great.
Maybe we need to be
It's
pushing
not build trust.
opportunity and do more as producers of do more research on
So I've got
on the
partnerships that
private
layering
sector that is
research and funding. So
doing
like
it
for
right.
students, that's
You
kind
know,
of
that's-
layering that new
that
students
is
come
that,
in,
you know,
but
where
the
these
anchor
values are
researcher
embedded
kind of
in
remains,
the
and
way
they're
that
the ones
they
that
do their
trust,
business.
and you
Yeah.
kind of trust that they're not going to
And
send
perhaps we just need to
extractive
be
research.
highlighting those
But
more
I
and
think
getting
the,
that
maybe
out
the
in the cities.
extractive
That's how
nature that
oh, that
evidence is
company, maybe
produced
others will
is
follow
also,
suit. I don't know.
sometimes
We probably
it's
need more kind of,
it's not evidence that actually the community needs.
being honest, or brokers who don't have private sector interests to be doing that work, to highlight the improvements of the because then you're obviously going to
Causing harm, you know.
Yeah.
And I think also at ESG, I mean, ESG is a big thing. It's all my area. I don't know much about ESG, but I do think it is driving a lot of private sector behavior.
I think, you know, what ESG is.
And environment,
We've worked with a lot of decision makers and we've gone
it's like
through
the
beautiful
corporate
production
social
joint
responsibility. It's like what social responsibility and other guys. And I think environment, social, governance.
yeah, how they need to make
And a lot of
decision making
institutional investors are actually not looking at ESG,
you know, spend 3 years understanding something, they need to kind of make a decision now because the window is,
like a big pension fund.
but also possibly that research
It is moving in that direction. I don't know if it's going to end up with greenwashing.
so how do we like also bridge some of those information scales, but I guess that is the
To report back,
is
but I
learning
think
platforms,
the
platforms
opportunities
for
that we
learning,
have
learning from
saved,
case
we
studies.
can do it in a much more broader way. I just want to highlight the issues and if you can come up with the who to say which points. So I just wrote like 5 points, but please feel free to disagree with me. So one was about this, how do we scale within planetary boundaries? I think the issue that you mentioned on that nature ecosystem, and I think, sorry I did not get your name. Lisa, okay. So how you have brought down this issue, if you can talk from this perspective, you too, and then physical production and demonstration of best practices, I think from there, if the opportunities comes from you.
So what is, I've got that on the challenge board, but what opportunity do you see, how can we take that? So if we, do you think that some of the, I mean, I'm sure a lot of these can help, so is, but often the benefits, they're not that easy. They're not dedication,
Maybe that we not be like we can
sorry.
maybe later on.
Yeah, development versus ecological
Developing
compensation.
issues and people papers and projects and all.
So I just
Coming
think
back
that,
to
I'm sorry, I forgot
forgot who said that, but I think that's a very interesting one. Said governance, if you can post, like, then we have a great good work and let your voice is being heard. And actually we can capture that like really well in our graphic arts, we can capture that really well because it's kind of the opportunity I do not want to use your words. So yeah, if that's okay. The challenge is do a very quick roundup. I do not want to focus on the challenges because these are kind of common. Just wanted to like, oh,
There's one stuck up.
Two representatives here from 3IE who do evidence gap mapping, and they haven't yet done an evidence gap mapping, so meta-analysis of what the evidence is for biodiversity and climate. And they would like to as an institution, but they haven't found the right match with a funder. So I think funding is another challenge.
Then down with brokers, and as an example, there's extension agents for departments, and then you can have other, other people have mentioned researchers playing some of that bridging role. But there could be multiple others. You could have a tool or a process that could also help broker information.
And I'm talking about research,
maybe brokers or brokering.
Implementation, but you cannot build those relationships in the
I think sometimes there's also another we're out of time. In one of our area projects, what really I think worked well was
we kind of
the
have
teams
time.
because it was already, they managed to go in and they brought vets into the community with them when they were running a workshop, and this was really useful for the community. It's practical, like it's not part of the project, but it's like this was really useful coming in with bringing vet use services and sort of going through the women's livestock project. So just even some of that
wonderful
because for me, like you can't.
the session,
I
so
find it
really
really
thinking
difficult to
about
pay people to attend
creative
workshops.
in
I
that
want it to be
production
useful.
process,
Or doing the
bringing in
completely
art-based
exclude
approaches,
local
bringing in
universities from
games,
being able
bringing
to do
in
the same things
music
they
and
can't
drama,
afford to pay.
and I think that's open
Trades, expectations, etc. But like what other kind of value that could be in a workshop might be useful in the long term. But does it really come to the fact that I've lost 5 hours by just sitting my goods on the side of the road, or from tending my cow, or from, sort of navigating those tensions, like you talk about inclusion,
Got the payout, even though they paid insurance into a system to sign
it
up.
is such a disconnect between research and then like research is not
link it back to the
so
bottom
they
line.
try and understand a problem and often that's
So new ways to engage the
but
private
the next
sector.
step into investments and action,
Okay.
suddenly
In these
the researchers can't do that, they don't know how to do that, they have no business governance, but like how do you, there's like another type of brokering that needs to happen there to make sure that the evidence is used to inform action. Looking concerned.
you just do
Like
that
want to see that.
whoever, like if there's any volunteer also to summarize it, that would be awesome. And like other one or two person can share.
I just feel we can add in models of learning. So maybe we need one new, under the private sector one, we could do a little research on, new approaches to, new ways to approach private sector in collaboration process. Bring on, some of this new,
But that's the problem, they are not treated as
generation.
yeah, you need to be there and understand it.
Visitors are they have touched and feel and met people and like experienced the floods. Throw them into experiential co-production.
But sometimes I feel also I'm a little, the outsider type of sector that
But see, there is a reason for this skepticism. Because every time a good comes out, it's just It's not, this is our business model. And we are making money because this is good for the environment, it's good for the people, and it's good for our bottom line. These are never an argument you hear.
And it shouldn't just be win-win, it should be win-win-win-win, because that's where it needs to be.
Throughout the supply chain.
And we recognize private sector as being so essential for long-term sustainability. And, if we put something in for a project like that ban for the PFAS wetlands, for those out on bicycles, that will continue. Well after USA is gone, and if his friends realize he's making money on it, they're gonna do the exact same thing.
And it's going to scale in different cities, in different parts.
Exactly, and then you talk to these women and they're like, I'm gonna sell my own bicycle, and I'm not gonna, I'm gonna work independently, or I'm going to, work for him, but I don't have to rent a bicycle now, I have to make my everything else. So you get that self-actualization for these poor women who had nothing prior to working with this private sector. Not a code. I mean,
But it's also bringing,
it's quite a lot working in agriculture.
but it's very interesting because
So I
not finding a vendor or then from farm to farm to do something, they can learn how to do it themselves, they can learn the benefits of it, and it's kind of bringing people together to also share their experiences.
Private sector needs to be versus these multi-corporate global organizations. And so recognizing that differentiation of the private sector as well.
I think that there's been, and working with other people in agriculture, and I've always struggled with this working for USA, is that local market, that protection for that local market, making sure that there's, good and safe, nutritious food in that local market versus like buying something by export. I've always been one really clear on, shouldn't the focus be on that?
Do we have another session on the bench?
I was judged this sometimes when people are taking $1 for skills and development to be in that space.
We turning in. We giving. Let's go to the boards. We're going to get up and move.
So,
Do I have a representative from our group that wants to report? Evan By is reporting back. Good. Yeah. You were going to be a
Hi,
speaker, so you're not
thank you
going out of
everyone
it.
for taking very active participation in this group discussion. So actually we have, because we are into the lunchtime, so I do not want to hold people's time so much. So very quickly on the challenges part, but I think these challenges kind of seems like repetitive, so I would not go into like detail, but we would focus on the opportunities part. And I think we have sets of volunteers to talk from like different opportunities parts here. But like for the identifying the blind spots or challenges on the producers end, we have got this disconnection between like sources of evidence, big data versus local evidence, and then contextualizing evidence in ongoing change, which goes for like dealing like flux, and disconnection between what is being produced versus needed, the critical what is critical for co-creation, co-developed for uptake or like upscaling of these data, and yes, effective communication of data produced, how to connect that with the users group. So these all came in, and then importance of ground truthing. For some of the evidence users, the interpretation of the evidence, translating it for the decision makers, and then bias and how hijacking, like what part of data are being presented from the community to the producers group, the issues of like finding that tipping point or thresholds for nature/ecosystem. So all of these came in the challenges part. I am not going into that much detail, but can I now have the volunteers for the for showing, like discussing these opportunities part? So
Yeah. So the first opportunity, I think there's a couple nested in here. We talked about the opportunity for capacity building and skills and knowledge that this whole area takes a lot of skills and expertise, and so there's an opportunity to make sure we have those people in the system. And for example, those people can help with scaling our information or our evidence, particularly in this case we were talking about within planetary boundaries, and downscaling that to your project level. So understanding what are the thresholds or the tipping points at the outset of your project planning, so that when you get to the monitoring and evaluation framework, you've already contextualized it.
Then we have a point for
Thank you. So we spoke on the issues around sustainability of best practices being tied to issues around co-creation of evidence and demonstration of best practices for adoption and continuity. And chief among them is bringing in of creativity, arts, the music to create those lasting memories into practices. Thank you.
Then we have the
Thanks, I'll just sit here. So one of the issues we mentioned was that the sort of binary separation of producers and users, and that actually users can also be producers of knowledge, and many producers, we definitely use local knowledge all the time, don't we? So that made me think a little bit about the opportunities associated with the community-based monitoring, and then also citizen science. But in some of the work we've been doing recently in the projects we've been looking at, they said you can't expect people at communities to do this. When everyone, if you do monitoring, you paid for it. So we've got to find ways to actually acknowledge that work and incentivize it. And the one project actually had a little community-based fund because the communities were trying to maintain an organic landscape. The farmers paid into this little fund, and those community-based monitoring people were actually paid via a community fund. So it's kind of finding those sorts of opportunities. But it's almost breaking this divide as who's producing and who's using knowledge. Thanks.
Yes. Then the point on private sector, you both are doing that, right?
So in private sector, we had a discussion related to when private sector does something good, they always consider it social corporate responsibility, as opposed to looking at it as a good business practice. So how are those opportunities to engage maybe some of the more progressive businesses in a dialogue, in a discussion, when they're expressing the need to, whether it's pay people a good salary, whether it's to protect the natural environment, that we can use those as an entry point and perhaps set an example. And we also discussed the fact that wouldn't it be fun to have a game for private sector where they are, maybe put on the other side of the equation. So.
Yeah. And we have the one last point on the governance. Do you wanted to capture that?
On governance?
Yeah, the last point. Development versus ecological.
Right. Yeah, we talked about government incentives, as in government should be able to provide a platform in which the private sector is attracted to participate in these issues. And one of the issue that we raised was that we know that the private sector is more interested in the profit. They need to make money. So any activity that they see that the costs are going up, it's very unlikely that they will participate in such activities. So this is where now government comes in to provide some incentives to attract them to participate in such activities.
So government pays the private sector to get involved?
Yeah, it could be, incentivized, yes. Yeah, like tax breaks,
They can change the policy context. So license to operate, you can only operate if you offset or you provide ecological compensation, so that our development trajectory is being tracked by a protection of our ecological safety net.
It's not cash payments. Yeah.
I was just being cheeky.
You struck a chord.
So this is our
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone. Do you want to do that for your one?
I'm not doing it.
Yeah.
Can you imagine? If you'd like, you could actually stand up and come a little bit closer if you want to see the flip charts. I think our group was kind of out of the box thinkers from the get-go, because this line between producers and users was kind of blurred right from the start. And so perhaps for those who are going to be writing the report, maybe we need to just think about it. Is it a producer-users thing, or maybe there's another other categories to actually be using, or to box things in? Maybe we shouldn't box things in. Anyway, from a challenges perspective, I think on both sides of the group, there seem to be more challenges than enablers and opportunities being tagged. But anyway, from challenges, we had a trust. Trust was a major thing. We were talking about different types of role players. And for instance, I was giving an example about we work in transboundary river basins, and how different member states might not necessarily trust the other, to share the information with the next member state, because they're not sure what you will ask for in return, because you can't really say you kind of own that money. So we had an issue about trust, sharing and ownership of data. We also had an example for the different donors, the Americans, the Germans, the British. They all have different ways of looking at things, but then you're also driving the discussion as well. We had challenges in terms of poor involvement of community, and we really had really great examples coming through. We also had jargon. So in terms of involving the community, how, once you've created that data, have you communicated it back to the community in such a way that it is not jargon, and that it is speaking to your policy needs, maybe if you're a policy maker or implementer, but is it going to enable the community to actually make changes on the ground as well? We had, similar to the other group, capacity was discussed. The power of global maps and the responsibility, who makes them. Mel not embedded, I really loved this one. Because I feel like everything is everybody's business, and sometimes, but then in reality, to actually implement and to actually make everyone own that the different responsibilities becomes a challenge. But in reality, we should make monitoring, evaluation, reporting, and learning everyone's business. And I think we even tagged that as an opportunity, socializing MEL, so making it everyone's business. And then, before I move on to the other chart, from people from my group, are there any challenges? Because I didn't choose all of them. Are there any challenges that you'd like to highlight?
Thank you. Just a point of mandates. So asking the tough questions that may come up later by asking who's defining the mandate, who's defining resilience, and who operationalizes the mandate or tries to achieve it, and then who is perceived to be benefiting from it or not actually in reality. So asking the, I think it's in the opportunities, my mind is in the solution space now, but asking the uncomfortable questions early on in the project so that M&E actually becomes part of the project and research also gets defined like that, research or action. Thanks.
I think if you can be very brief on the opportunities parts, because people I think are getting
hungry.
Yeah.
Okay. I think opportunity is the one word without even looking. Co-production, co-creation. We really thought that was nice. I think initially it was a discussion about, okay, maybe it's the community that is being involved in the co-creation, but we were now taking it a level higher. Like, if you don't co-create with government, then government, who has the mandate to solve some of these issues, can't actually quickly uptake whatever lessons you have. And then partnerships, layering research and funding, and then asking questions early was another big opportunity that we had as well. Okay, in efforts for people's stomachs. But I also loved this point, just one more point. For enablers and amplifiers, I loved the scaling, you know, like we always talk about scaling up, but then there's scaling deep, and then also scaling out. So like moving the dialogue from maybe implementation to like policy, and then the scaling deep is like making it more intense, and then the scaling up, which is what we normally talk about.
Thank you. Thank
Shouldn't
you
make
so
me
much.
talk.
Because we are very late, yeah, it's time for lunch. We will be capturing all of your points in the final part. So still, if just when you have some time, come take a look of the graphic harvester. Yeah, we'll move it downstairs. If you think that the points did not come, please give us in the written us in the sticky note. We will put that down, but that part will be filled up. Yeah. So thank you so much for that.
Thank you, everybody.
Sorry, I had a PTSD moment with what we spoke about. Yes, I've got funding from Walmart Foundation, which is massive.
There, I think the parallel sessions on cross-cutting things help from later. Thank you. Amir, what is your answer?
We're gonna have a bank of GRP and now we're gonna fly all 8 fellows up.
So we are going down.